All right, so the first factor that we're going to look at is size. So I'm going to use green as the color I'm drawing. So the patch that I'm going to draw would be what would remain as forest ecosystem. So we have a better option would be obviously to leave as big of a patch as possible. So imagine this is filled in with green, right? So the urban development would be around, and then the section that we're going to leave green would be the forest ecosystem. So the better option is to create a large block that's untouched as forest. Okay, so a worse option would be if we left only a small block. Okay, so this should kind of make sense. Why would it be better to keep more forest than less forest? Of course, we're able to support more living things the larger the ecosystem is that we're leaving. Okay, so another factor is how many patches are we going to leave as forest? So let's say we're going to take the same size of land. Okay, it's actually better to keep one large piece of forest. Then let's say that this was the exact same size, but it was split up. Okay, so imagine that if we were to add up all 4 of these blocks, it would be equal to that one block on the other side. So it's better to have one larger ecosystem than to keep 4 little mini ecosystems. And the reason why is because you have to imagine, so in this white section would be houses and different city items. So, box stores and churches and schools and fire departments. And so all kinds of things that are going in between those ecosystems. Whereas if you have one large block, the inside of this is basically untouched. So you only have the human influences on the outside instead of kind of everywhere here. All right, so the third factor here is proximity. So meaning, let's say we had to build 3 ecosystems. So we had to split the land in 3 ways. So the best option, if you have to do it in multiple sections, would be to have the sections as close as possible. Okay, so let's say we have our 3 blocks here, right? So even though there is development in between, maybe there's a road that's in between here, right? You still have a small enough distance that, let's say you have some deer living in this ecosystem, maybe they can cross the street and go to the other side of the ecosystem. So actually, anytime you're driving, let's say you're with your parents and you're driving in and you see forests on both sides. So you have like forest on one side of the road, forest on the other side of the road. This is essentially what was happening. So they basically made enough room for a road or maybe 1 or 2 things, but it's not like there's a giant space in between the different forest sections. Now, the worst option is if you were to take the same amount, but have them apart. Because what happens here is, obviously if this is too far away, the deer or the squirrel are not able to go from one section to another, right? Like if this is Bayview and then over here this is like Dufferin Street or let's say a Woodbine, right? Like the deer is not going to walk for 5 kilometers to go to the next patch of forest. When it's just across the street, right? Of course it probably would, right? So obviously the worst option is to have those patches far apart. So having them closer together gives those populations a better chance. Okay. Connectedness. So this is talking about, let's say if we have an opportunity to keep the patches close enough together that maybe they have a connection on one side. So let's say, for example, I have 2 blocks of forest. Okay, so let's say I have a block of forest here and a block of forest here. Well, maybe there's a way that we can actually have the blocks of forest connected somewhere, like connected in between. Right? So maybe here, this is like a dead-end road and there's like maybe a church and then it doesn't go through. There's a forest behind the church. And on this side, maybe there's a school and there's a forest behind the school. So what you're doing is even though they're two large blocks, they are connected in between by forest land. So what that allows is it's even better than this one up here, because there's no road or anything that the animals will have to cross. It's actually still connected by a patch of forest. So this allows for migration or movement to happen in between here all the time. You don't have to cross a street or anything like that. So obviously the worst option would be if they were not connected. So let's say they were the same, imagine they were the same size blocks. Obviously I'm awful at drawing the same size blocks, right? So here, this is the same size, okay, but they're not connected. So that would be a worse option. So they actually call these connections wildlife corridors. It's kind of like you're leaving a hallway or something for the animals to be able to walk through. All right, so the last factor to consider here is called integrity. So integrity is basically talking about we want to limit the amount of human interaction with an ecosystem. Okay, so we want to try and minimize how much is being exposed to humans. Okay, so let's say for integrity, we're going to look at, let's say there's a lake here. We'll try and make these as much as possible. So imagine here's a lake, and this is all forest around the lake. Look at how good I am at doing this. Okay, so it's all forest around the lakes, okay? And we want to build a road. Okay, so I'm going to use my black color for a road. So the best option would be, if I want to build a road, let's say from one end to the other, the best option would be to build my road away from the lake, right? So that way, you know, the humans are just going to drive through, and even let's say, obviously this is the worst thing you can do, but let's say somebody were to litter, right? The litter and stuff would not be near this aquatic ecosystem. We're keeping the integrity of this ecosystem as pure as possible. We don't want to disrupt it. So obviously a worse option would be, let's say we were to do a road right beside the lake. And maybe we do another road, like we branch the road off, and then we're going to do another roadway, right? So obviously the worst option would be to have many roadways. And obviously having it close to this ecosystem would be worse than if it was far away, okay? So human interaction basically will be limited. The more you limit human interaction, the better it is for the ecosystem because it's naturally taking place, okay? So the next section here is looking at more aquatic ecosystems, not necessarily human activity for fragmenting the land. So we're just looking at different impacts of human activity on aquatic or wetland areas. So one example is humans like to replace the natural vegetation along the shoreline. So what happens here, this is more so along the coastline or shoreline. Let's say like a beach on the lake. Let's say there's a lake where people like to go and they want to go swimming and they want to go fishing in this lake. So naturally, on the shoreline, there's going to be different types of like plants, right? So like you don't really see it. So let's say you're going to the beach on a summer day. It's not like you really see a ton of plants in the soil or the sand. And that's actually because before people come to the beach, they actually will take out, it's almost like they're ripping out the plants so that people have nice smooth sand to lie down on. Okay, so why is this so bad? So of course, first of all, you're going to erode the shoreline. So meaning the nutrients that are in that sand will get washed away. So there are many different living things that use that vegetation as breeding areas. So maybe laying eggs or building a nest. And of course, it's destroying the habitat of things that lived in that vegetation. Okay, so it's definitely a negative impact. Okay, dredging to create deeper water for a boat. So what this is looking at is, let's say you have a lake, okay, and if it's not very deep, you cannot have a boat on the lake, okay, but let's say the town wants people to come and they want them to be able to ride their boats on the lake. what they will do is they will actually dig. They will kind of dig down, like using machinery. They will scoop up soil to make it deeper so that some people can come and, ride their boat on the lake. So obviously, if it's a naturally deep lake, this is fine. But if they're trying to make a man-made lake, this is obviously going to destroy the habitat of the things that lived at the bottom of this lake, right? So you're going to disrupt this habitat for sure. Of course, it's also going to remove and destroy the habitat of those bottom organisms. Okay, sediment runoff. So sediment runoff is essentially looking at, things that are coming. We actually looked at this with the nitrogen cycle. Things that get washed away from nearby lands, they can go into water systems. So, let's say we had, let's use this as an example. So let's say there was a farm here. When it rains, what happens is it washes downhill. Maybe it's better if there's a hill here. But downhill, it will essentially run off some sediment. So basically, soil will get pushed into the lake. Now, that probably doesn't think that it'll affect it that much now. But actually, over time, what can happen is you'll have to start, basically, it starts building up more and more soil at the bottom. So what happens is over time, the lake gets shallower and shallower. Okay. Also, the sediment that gets pushed in, the soil that goes in, will destroy the habitat of the bottom living organisms again, because it's basically got like stuff that's going on top of it. Okay. Commercial fishing is, pretty self-explanatory, right? So humans go and they fish so they can sell the fish at different stores. So the nets can cause damage to the organisms that are living at the bottom of the lake or river or ocean. And of course, it can cause damage to other abiotic features. So meaning if you remove enough living things from a specific area, it can basically disrupt the balance that's there. So the nutrients as well. Okay, so let's say we wanted to build a subdivision, but there is a wetland in the middle of where we want to build our subdivision. So what they will do is they will drain the wetland. So what they'll do is they will pump out the water so that they're able to actually build on that land area. So obviously this goes without saying. What you're doing is you're destroying that area completely because you want it to build on or to make farmland space. So you're losing the entire habitat. So all the species that live there will either have to find a new habitat to live in or they'll end up dying. Okay, so not really great interaction with humans here. So we're looking at some negative impacts on aquatic ecosystems.